In the heart of France, nestled within the Centre-Val de Loire region, lies the small village of Cloyes-sur-Loire. It was here, in the late 12th century, that a boy named Stephen was born into a humble shepherd's family. The tranquility of his pastoral beginnings belied the extraordinary and tragic journey that lay ahead. This unassuming boy, later known as Stephen of Cloyes, would become the central figure in one of history's most poignant and perplexing episodes, the Children's Crusade of 1212. Stephen's world, like much of Europe during the Middle Ages, was steeped in religion. The Catholic Church wielded significant influence over all aspects of life, from the social and political spheres to the most personal facets of daily existence. As was common during this time, religious teachings and stories would have been an integral part of Stephen's early education, preparing the fertile ground for the remarkable claim that would soon catapult him onto the world stage. In 1212, Stephen, barely more than a child himself, made a bold proclamation. He had been visited by no less a figure than Jesus Christ himself. According to Stephen, Jesus appeared to him while he was tending his sheep and entrusted him with a letter for the King of France, Philip II. For a shepherd boy, this divine mandate was not just extraordinary, it was almost incomprehensible. Yet, what made this tale even more remarkable was the nature of the alleged message. Stephen claimed that Jesus instructed him to preach peace and mount a children's crusade to the Holy Land, not through the force of arms, but through the purity of faith. The mission, to convert the Muslim inhabitants of Jerusalem to Christianity. This narrative, while radical, appealed immensely to the prevailing religious sentiment of the time. People were desperate for a fresh hope after the disheartening failures of the previous official crusades. At this juncture, it is worth considering the improbability of this situation. A mere child, without any formal religious training or status, claimed to have been chosen for a mission of immense spiritual and geopolitical significance. However, the extraordinary appeal of his story wasn't solely due to the religious climate. It was also deeply rooted in the power of innocence and purity that children represented, ideals that resonated strongly within the medieval Christian consciousness. In the religious and socio-political landscape of medieval Europe, Stephen's claim carried an unexpected weight. The world he was born into was marked by constant warfare and political unrest. The authority of the Church, though still significant, had been challenged by the failures of the Crusades. Europe was looking for a new hope, a fresh approach to the Holy Land, and they found it in Stephen. This shepherd boy became an emblem of hope and divine providence in a world that desperately needed it. His age, far from being a deterrent, actually enhanced his appeal. In the medieval mindset, children were seen as uncorrupted vessels of God's will. Their innocence, it was believed, might succeed where the complicated and self-serving motivations of adults had failed. One might wonder how such a young boy could lead a crusade. Well, it's crucial to remember that the concept of childhood was very different in the 13th century compared to our understanding of it today. While Stephen was young, he would have already been shouldering adult responsibilities. As a shepherd, he was entrusted with the care of his flock, a task that required maturity, patience, and resilience. Curiously, while we think of the Children's Crusade as a movement of thousands of children, historical accounts suggest that the followers were not solely children. There were many adolescents and adults who, captivated by Stephen's message and charisma, joined the cause. So, despite his youth, Stephen led a remarkably diverse group of followers, a fact that underscores his extraordinary influence and leadership skills. In medieval society, literacy was not widespread, particularly among the rural poor. Therefore, it is unlikely that Stephen himself could read or write. Yet, he claimed to carry a letter from Jesus, a divine message that had been transposed from a heavenly vision into a physical missive. It's worth wondering who transcribed this letter for him. We'll probably never know, but the existence of this letter shows how Stephen's supporters were already working to legitimize and disseminate his extraordinary claim. After his purported divine encounter, Stephen of Cloyes faced the monumental task of delivering his message to King Philip II. This journey in itself was no small feat for a shepherd boy from a rural village. With little more than his faith to guide him, Stephen journeyed to the bustling city of St. Denis, where he intended to deliver his celestial letter to the king. Arriving in St. Denis, Stephen was akin to a rural David in the urban Goliath. The contrast between his humble origins and the grandeur of the city must have been stark. Yet, his determination was unwavering. He sought an audience with the king, an unthinkable feat for a child of his standing. Interestingly, King Philip II, also known as Philip Augustus, was one of the most powerful figures in Europe at that time. His reign marked a period of expansion and consolidation for the French monarchy. Though Philip had initially been part of the Third Crusade, he'd returned to France early due to disputes with other leaders. His experience with the Crusades was marked by disappointment and disillusionment. When presented with Stephen's letter, the king was dismissive. He did not heed the divine instructions that Stephen claimed to bring. Some historical accounts suggest that Philip even tried to dissuade the boy from his mission. The king's lack of support, however, did little to deter Stephen. In fact, it may have even bolstered the boy's resolve and the conviction of his followers, presenting an even greater challenge to overcome. Ironically, Philip's dismissal probably worked in Stephen's favor. The king's indifference might have been interpreted as further proof of the corruption and spiritual bankruptcy of the adult world, reinforcing the need for a children's crusade. If the elite were too entangled in their political machinations to heed a divine call, then it fell upon the pure and faithful, like Stephen, to answer it. This encounter set the stage for what was to come. Undeterred by the king's dismissal, Stephen returned to his followers, and plans for the children's march to the Holy Land began in earnest. The unlikely shepherd-turned-prophet was about to lead one of the most extraordinary movements in history, fueled by nothing more than unwavering faith and youthful optimism. Upon his return from St. Denis, Stephen found his following had grown exponentially. News of his divine mandate spread like wildfire, fueled by the religious fervor and desperation that gripped the region. Thousands of people, not just children but also adolescents and adults, were now willing to march under his banner towards the Holy Land. The spark that Stephen had ignited was rapidly turning into a conflagration. It's essential to note that the word crusade evokes images of armored knights and large, organized armies. However, Stephen's crusade bore little resemblance to this archetype. His was not a military campaign but more of a pilgrimage, driven by a deep belief that their faith alone could achieve what armed forces had not. Curiously, while Stephen is often solely credited as the leader of the Children's Crusade, he was not the only child prophet of the time. Almost simultaneously, a boy named Nicholas from the German region of Cologne also claimed to have received a divine message and was gathering his own followers. Some historical accounts suggest a rivalry between these two crusades, each believing that they were the true divine mission. Yet, regardless of whether they saw themselves as rivals or compatriots, it is undeniable that their stories are inextricably linked, serving as mirror images of each other in this dramatic period of history. The process of rallying his followers and organizing the march must have been a daunting task for Stephen. Nevertheless, he seemed to handle it with surprising ability, a testament to his charisma and leadership skills. Sermons and processions became the order of the day as the child crusaders prepared to leave their homes behind. A curious fact about this period is the reports of miracles associated with Stephen and his followers. Chroniclers at the time wrote about a series of miraculous events, such as springs of water bursting forth from the ground where Stephen had planted his staff. Whether you view these as fabrications or manifestations of mass belief, these reported miracles undoubtedly added to the aura surrounding Stephen and his divine mission. As the Children's Crusade was about to set forth, Stephen of Cloyes, the young shepherd-turned-prophet, found himself at the helm of a movement that had gained a momentum of its own. The journey ahead was filled with uncertainties, but their faith was unshakable, their determination unyielding. In the summer of 1212, a sea of humanity began its march from Vendôme towards the Mediterranean Sea under Stephen's leadership. The sight would have been both awe-inspiring and heartrending. There were children, adolescents, and adults, all drawn together by faith and a common purpose. They carried no weapons, only their unwavering belief that they could achieve what the mightiest armies had failed to do, peacefully reclaim the Holy Land. the logistics of the journey were an immense challenge. The Crusaders had to travel hundreds of miles on foot, relying on the generosity of towns and villages for food and shelter. This was a time before maps as we know them today, and navigation was largely reliant on landmarks and guidance from locals. There was no overarching plan or strategic route, only a general direction and the steadfast hope that God would guide their steps. Curiously, the children seemed to bring a spirit of jubilation to their mission. Chroniclers described them singing songs of devotion, their voices ringing out in unison. It was this spectacle of youthful hope and faith that moved many to tears and inspired others to join their ranks. As the Crusaders marched, tales of their mission spread throughout Europe, even reaching as far as the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II. Intriguingly, while Frederick II was known for his skepticism towards religion, he expressed his admiration for the children's faith and determination. This acknowledgement from one of the most influential rulers of the time further enhanced the legitimacy of their cause. However, the journey was not without its difficulties. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, the distances grueling. Illness, exhaustion, and malnutrition started taking their toll. Yet, despite these hardships, the Crusaders pressed on, their belief unwavering, their spirits undeterred. Stephen's charisma and unwavering faith had been a rallying point, but they could not shield his followers from the hard truths of their situation. Illness and death began to afflict the group, their youthful energy fading with each passing day. This grim reality paints a stark contrast to the initial jubilation that marked the beginning of their journey. One of the tragic ironies of the Children's Crusade is that while it was driven by a desire for peace, it was exploited by those who saw it as an opportunity for personal gain. As the children reached the Mediterranean, they were met not by a parted sea, as some had hoped, but by opportunistic merchants who offered to transport them to the Holy Land. What seemed like a divine intervention was, in reality, a ruthless act of deception. Some chronicles suggest that these merchants, under the guise of charity, offered their ships to transport the children across the Mediterranean. However, instead of transporting them to Jerusalem, they sold them into slavery in various parts of northern Africa, a fate far removed from the holy mission they had embarked upon. Stephen, the young shepherd who had become the beacon of hope for thousands, was confronted with a cruel twist of fate. The details surrounding his circumstances during this time remain shrouded in mystery. What is known, however, is that the boy who had led his followers with such faith and conviction was unable to save them from the heartbreaking fate that awaited them. Yet, even in the face of this unimaginable betrayal, accounts suggest that Stephen never lost his faith. His story, though marred by tragedy, serves as a testament to the enduring power of belief and the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of insurmountable odds. Additionally, the Children's Crusade had significant implications for the perception of childhood in medieval society. The Crusade, led by children and characterized by its innocent faith, challenged the traditional view of children as passive and dependent. Instead, it portrayed them as active agents capable of shaping their own destinies and influencing the course of history. Interestingly, the village of Cloyes-sur-Loire, Stephen's birthplace, commemorates the Children's Crusade with a plaque, a sober reminder of the young shepherd boy who embarked on a mission of peace, armed with nothing but his faith and conviction. This acknowledgement, though small, keeps the memory of Stephen and his followers alive, ensuring that their story continues to inspire and provoke thought. The life of Stephen of Cloyes may have been short, and his mission may have ended in disaster, but his story continues to resonate through history, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the profound impact of youthful courage.